Hi, and welcome back to my second podcast. This is Susan Regan, and today I'm interviewing a longtime group member, and he goes by the name of Farnsworth. So I'm so happy to be talking with you today, Farnsworth. And I know we had a very similar conversation 2.5 years ago, and you and I got to listen to that audio, and it's so interesting to hear all the places you've been since then. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be back.
Yeah, it's really nice to be able to track people's growth. And as a clinician and a coach, it's so nice to see people really working on themselves and big and little ways. And the way that I think we measure our growth, at least in my groups that I run, is by the kinds of relationships we can have and the kind of levels and depths we can go with people. So I wanted to just talk with you about some of the themes that have been coming up in our group that you're in right now, and also kind of backing off of the theme this month, which is Valentine's Day, love, and just hope for relationships in general, and the way that you see yourself having gained some capacity to maybe love more, to be yourself more, to have hope for your future vision of relationships and how you want to be in the world. So I hope you'll be willing to just take a look at that with me and talk to me about some of your thoughts and growth ideas.
1,000,000% yes. And maybe the best place to start is just to report that, in contrast with the last time we spoke, and for the first time since I got divorced back in 2016, I am in a committed monogamous long-term relationship, which is exciting and fun and full of hope.
That's great. I mean, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what you learned from your past to be able to actually go back into a relationship where you're feeling, I'm imagining you're feeling really hopeful about it. And I'm just wondering what it took for you to get there.
Oh man, how much time do we have?
You know?
A lot of different things come to mind. I think the first thing it took was coming to grips with what I think I contributed to my failed marriage, which were things I needed to actively work on and have been working on with you in group and in my own individual therapy. Things like placating and people pleasing, or being reluctant to state my own needs, self-sacrificing, not setting healthy boundaries. And what I realized I needed to do was I was suddenly aware of how much self-sacrifice was getting in the way of intimacy, because I would put aside my own needs to make whoever I was dating feel good and keep someone else happy. But then I wouldn't really feel good myself. And I realized that that just started creating distance. And essentially, I wasn't bringing my true self to the table. So I had to stop actively doing that and be more open and honest and communicative and not worry so much, because I mean it's easier, I think, to self-sacrifice. You know, you're going to please your partner and maintain peace and order. It's sort of like a protective mechanism, but like the more I did it, the more I felt like every time it was a little bit of a nail in the coffin of that relationship. And so I had to double down and actively work on not doing that anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, it reminds me of the concept of projection, how we almost have this concept of what a relationship is supposed to be like and how we're supposed to engage in it. And that almost feels like a separation from yourself, the way that you're describing it. Like you
Yeah.
weren't connected enough with yourself to be in the relationship yourself, but you were kind of acting like you were thought you were supposed to be, or trying to be there the way you felt like the other person wanted you to be there.
100% yes. It's projection, and also a term I think that you taught me, Susan, which was integration. I had this sense that I could not show up in a relationship in any way but a positive one. So one half of the puzzle, the dark side, the shadow side of things, I was not bringing to the table. I was afraid to, because I was worried I would alienate my partner or myself or whatever. I thought that relationships needed to be rosy rainbows and unicorns and beauty all the time. And I found that by not bringing that, by not integrating whatever sort of ambivalences or misgivings I might have in a moment was actually worse.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, the separation from like the shadow side of oneself, because it's not, the shadow side of oneself is never as bad as we think it's going to be. But it's always interesting when we start hiding parts of ourselves from people, or the people that we want to be close to, and what that does to us and what it does to the relationship. Does that make sense how I'm saying it?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think what I was finding is exactly what you were saying before. I was going through the motions of what I thought a good boyfriend or partner needed to be. But in a lot of ways, and I would say this in group, I was hiding in plain sight. It would be easy for me to show up at group or on a date and only present the positive and the happy and hide the rest for fear of what people's response might be. And that didn't feel good for me, but also I think people sense when you're not really being true or authentic. And I paradoxically found that the more I talked about what my fears or worries were, and the more honest I was, the more
Mhm.
receptive potential partners were to me. For example, there was like a big stigma I felt like I had to overcome with divorce. Being a divorcee, I felt a lot of shame because, in contrast to marriage, which is this big, happy, open ceremony conducted in front of family and friends, you shout your love from the rooftops, from the mountaintops, and it's all in the light of day. Divorce was like very private and alone and dark, and something I felt like I had to go through on my own,
Mhm.
alone.
Mhm.
And so I was afraid that if I talked about that, or the fact that I was a divorcee and had been married before, potential matches, mates would be turned off, would be like, oh, I don't want to date that guy. He probably never wants to get married again. He probably doesn't have any hope for the future, for other relationships. And that was never the case. The more I brought up where I'd been and shared
Mhm.
the fact that I was a divorcee, the more receptive potential partners actually were. And so I suddenly found myself in a place where there's tons of hope for the future, and actually people appreciated it even more when I was sharing both sides of the coin, the yin and the yang.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a few things that brought up just what you said right there, because it's so important. And I think going back to the first thing that you said around the idea about placating and people pleasing, and that people who you were dating really didn't know who you were because that's what you were doing, almost like a self-protective mechanism. That it makes me think about two things. One is that love is actually giving and receiving. Just as much as it is giving, it is receiving, and that means being vulnerable. So in order to like be in a loving scenario, whether it's with your intimate partner or with people that are in your daily life or in your life who are special to you, you have to let them give to you too, right? And so if you're only doing the giving to kind of protect yourself, um, there is this lack of depth in the relationship as well, right? And hiding in the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. What sort of giving do you mean? Like what sort of giving?
I don't know.
Are,
I think about reciprocity more so, like that
mm,
there has to be a give and take, that it can't just be like when you talk about placating and people pleasing. I think I remember this, something that you had said once, is that you kept the focus on the other person a lot, like asking them the questions, getting them to talk,
oh
getting,
yeah.
and the focus was on them. And people love, everyone loves to be focused on, well, most everyone, but it's also a way for the other person to hide, right? So to allow yourself to actually be yourself and let people get to know you and ask for, hey, can you help, can do this with me or something like that, instead of feeling like what you do is end up just performing. Do you know what I mean? Or having it all together, or like what you
Yes.
said, being all sunshine and unicorns.
Yes. It was very easy in the early days of dating for me to sit there across a table or at the bar with a woman and ask her only questions about herself and make her feel good, but not really show up myself. And that doesn't feel good ultimately at the end of the day. I agree there needs to be reciprocity and vulnerability. And what I felt like, or I learned, was that that's just kind of another form of codependency. Like I was so willing when I was married to, abandon myself in order to stay connected with my former wife. And that was another version of it in dating, by not being vulnerable, by not allowing myself to receive. And you taught me something, Susan, that was great, that I started doing more and more in dating, which was, after I'd ask a few questions, if the person I was with on a date wasn't automatically interested in asking me things about me and drawing me out, I would say, hey, what would you like to know about me? Like, what is something I can tell you? And that felt great, because then it wasn't this one-sided, one-way traffic.
Right, right. It's because a lot of being in relationships and knowing that you want to be with someone is getting to know them and letting yourself be known. The other part I was thinking about with this whole concept of giving and receiving and being vulnerable is that if we aren't able to be ourselves, sometimes we act out a little bit. We keep secrets a little bit. And I wonder if you could think about that for a second. If you were placating and people pleasing, and you didn't really let people get to know you, especially the people that you were dating or wanting to figure out if you wanted to be in relationship with, what would you do to kind of, I don't know, push back?
What would I do? Where my mind goes with this, and maybe this is not exactly what you're asking, so please steer me if this is not the right direction. But what I was thinking about is, when you said act out, what I felt like I was seeing a lot from myself in dating was that if I wasn't being vulnerable and true and sharing what I was feeling as the relationship progressed, I would start to feel trapped, because I was only presenting that good side of things, but there were doubts and ambivalences that were cropping up. And then I would act out in strange ways, like, wait, I'm still on the dating apps and I'm supposed to be in a committed relationship. Why am I still playing out these old patterns of singledom? And I had to stop doing that, essentially. Is that somewhere where you were going?
No, that's exactly right. Because I think sometimes when we have this projection, this idea, this image of this is how love is supposed to be, or this is how our life is supposed to be, or our family, or our marriage, and we're not really talking about all of our insecurities about it to the person that we're with, then we don't really get to go deep with that person. We kind of just get to go surface and facade in a way. And then that's only going to take us so far, right?
Very much so. One of the best things about this relationship that I'm in right now, and who knows where it will go, of course, but that's the beauty and the fun of it, is that we have made a commitment to what I think is the most important thing in any relationship, at least after having been in a marriage that didn't last, which is communication. So we do go deep. We make sure that we don't keep things superficial. If we're feeling something, we state it outright. And it's like, in these early stages, we're constantly and continually negotiating and saying, hey, this works for me, or this reminds me of this. I'm feeling a little triggered because of a past trauma or experience. And the more that we talk that stuff out, the more we are authentically and like genuinely showing up to each other, and showing each other, like we were talking about, both sides of the coin, some of that shadow stuff. And what I fear might be like a big elephant in the room from my past that I need to bring up, my partner thus far has responded to so well and so openly. And then that it's like a reinforcement, a self-fulfilling cycle in the best possible way, because that allows me to be even more honest and show up even more authentically from there on out every single time. It's like, as opposed to being a nail in the coffin of a relationship when I would hide and not show up and just please the other person. It's sort of like it's more of an opening. I'm opening up more, and that allows a deepening and a flowering and a growth of the relationship that wasn't there prior, or in my past relationships for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Good. I mean, I feel like now we're getting somewhere with some of the aspects of this conversation, because I'm going to keep pulling back to the whole idea about love and hope, and what's hopeful about loving deeply and connecting deeply and learning how to do that. And it feels like one of the things that you said is that when you make a commitment to do the deep dive, to actually communicate the things that you feel insecure about or your vulnerabilities, that you actually can get to another place with that person where you can be more yourself, that you can show up more yourself. And the shadow part of you isn't like that profound. It's not that, I don't know, it's not going to turn somebody off. It's actually going to be something that's accepted.
Yeah, we all have these skeletons in our closets that I think we're afraid of bringing out into the light of day, but they're much worse, at least in my experience. Those things are a lot like being a divorcee, for example, are worse in my own mind than when I share them. And totally 100%, what I've been experiencing in this most recent relationship is that we'll hit an inflection point. There's a moment where there is a feeling, a doubt, ambivalence, a worry, a concern, whatever it is, what I would consider something negative or dark or shadowy that we have to address because it's there and we can feel it. And every time we do, even if we don't necessarily disagree on things, even if there's disagreement, even if I'm afraid it's going to disappoint my partner or vice versa, whenever we address it and deal with it, it's not as bad as I was worried it might be. And B, we level up. It's afterwards, our relationship goes to a whole nother level. And that's like wonderful to feel. And that is what gives me the hope. It's like we're getting better and that's fine. Like sometimes, you might not level up, you might agree to part ways or whatever, but either way, it's better than burying it under the rug or avoiding it.
Right. So, I think the whole idea about loving again, or letting yourself be vulnerable enough to love again, or growing enough that you feel like you have gained the capacity to deal with some things you weren't able to deal with before, like the shame of being a divorcee, like understanding maybe why that happened and really working on yourself to change where some of the patterns came from, allows this whole new place for you to go in relationships that you weren't able to go to before.
Very much so. It's about not only just learning from the past and not repeating past mistakes, but also, I think, getting to a much better place. I am super optimistic, and one of the questions I would get a lot on first or second dates right after I was divorced was, are you going to get married again? Are you open to marriage? Are you open to kids? Do you have hope for the future? Do you think you could be in love again? And my answer to all those things is like a wholehearted yes, absolutely. In fact, I feel like as opposed to being someone who feels like I have PTSD from divorce and from a failed marriage, it's actually the opposite. I feel like I'm going through a period of post-traumatic growth, and that experience, as tough as it was in the moment when I was going through it, has only made me better prepared for future relationships. And because of the learnings I have from that, divorce was like the best teacher, I think, teaching moment of my life. I look forward to relationships in an even better way because I know I'm confident in how I'm going to show up. I know I'm not going to just placate and people please. I know what I value. I know what I'm looking for. I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to share all the aspects of my personality, the good, the bad, the shadow, the light, whatever it might be, in a way that is honest and forthcoming with my partner. And that will lead to like places I never was able to go previously when I was married.
Right. So there is a thing about building capacity in there. I love the idea about going from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth, that this was the impetus to really change and grow and to look at like, okay, what do you need to get beyond this point where you really never wanted to be, which was in a failed marriage. I was thinking about, I write I do Facebook Lives on one of my sites that's called Relationship Solution Programs. And there's like the strengthening relationship group that's in there. And there's also a divorce group that's in there. And what I write a lot about, or what I talk a lot about, is some of the things that people are challenging themselves with in our groups that I run, and in the group that you're in, like just some of the ideas that people are up against and how they're working those through. And one of the things I talked a lot about was the idea of post-traumatic, from a divorce, being very post-traumatic stress from a divorce, and how it's really hard to break out of that. And one of the things I talked about this week was about in the strengthening relationship group, was the idea of a celebrity. And I don't usually talk about celebrity marriages in my work, but it was about the celebrity who talked about their biggest accomplishment in their life was to have good relationships with their family and with their marriage. And they felt like, and I was thinking about how that's not such a societal value. A lot of times what's a value is accomplishing things, having great careers, having money, having stuff. Instead of that, are we really focusing on our relationships as the things that give us the most and that we want to give the most back to? I really like that concept. And I don't know if that's something that you consider now, or you considered when you were getting married, like that was your focus of where you wanted to really evolve.
It was most definitely not my focus when I was getting married, but absolutely one of the things I learned through divorce, which is making sure that those core values are in sync. And I didn't know then, but absolutely my relationships with my family, first and foremost, my two parents, my siblings, and with friends and coworkers are immensely important to me. And I do think like the value of one's life can be measured in the quality of the relationships that you build. I didn't know that. When I was getting married, I thought it was only about my partner and my former wife and how we were together, and like that new family unit had to trump all others. But I no longer feel that way at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but
I,
yeah.
yeah, I just think it's a shift of focus. I think sometimes we think that's automatically just going to work out. And I think sometimes, we live in a society that is like sort of pro workaholism and not so much like quality of life. I think there's this site I've been recently looking at that's called like the Nap Ministry. And it's about just like slowing down and really slowing down and not pushing so much and noticing what happens if you're in that frame of mind. And so I think sometimes working on oneself is like slowing down and really not pushing, but really working on quality of, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others, and being really introspective and very conscious about, your behaviors, your actions, even how you speak to people. I mean, I think it is a slowing down, right? And a valuing.
Very much so. One of the great phrases you gave me, Susan, was I used to feel like when I was married and even when I was post-divorce dating, I would get in this like whirling dervish Tasmanian devil mode. It was like the easiest way to not feel whatever pain or trauma I had experienced and I needed to process, was just by getting really busy, filling my life up with errands and to-dos around the house and sports and activities and friends and partying and family and whatever it might be. And
Mm-hmm.
you called it ripping and running. And I've been doing a lot less of that now. And instead, just sitting and being with myself, enjoying my own company, looking
Mm-hmm.
less for those external sources of feeling good or validation, and going back, giving myself what I need, saying I love me no matter what happens, first and foremost, and showing up and doing the work in group and individual therapy, reading the books, whatever it might be, to provide myself with that baseline, that foundation, and it surely wasn't there prior.
Yeah, and revisiting it, revisiting that foundation. There's something else I wanted to go back to around what the celebrity again said about the accomplishment of marriage. And one of the things that they said was that they really looked at in their marriage, like nobody was at fault if there was a problem. You know how sometimes, it's almost that thought of the shadow side again of Like if there's a problem in the marriage, like, oh my gosh, it's you're doing it, you're creating this, you're not dealing with this correctly. But they said the automatic impulse of their relationship in them was to like actually look at it like, oh, we have something to solve. We got to solve something. Something isn't right between us, or something is upsetting us, or something's upsetting you. And looking at it like we got to find a solution for that. I just thought that was such a healthy way of reframing something. And oftentimes when people have conflict or they have disagreements or differences, that it is almost like my way or the highway, or, you know, you're doing this to me, or I don't like this. So it's such a different mindset. I wondered if you could see that in how you're working with your relationships now.
Oh yeah, 100% yes, a wholehearted yes, because in multiple ways. The first is at work. I often talk about in my work relationships how when there's a when there's an issue, we work on fixing the problem and not the blame. And it's true just as much in personal relationships. One of the hardest things that I had to learn was not taking on other people's feelings or experiences, allowing other people like my partner to be upset sometimes, and having that upset sit in between the two of us and not feeling like someone has to fix it or get rid of it. Those that upset, the anger, whatever it might be, can actually be super valuable information. It's data. It's something that is unspoken or uncommunicated that we should share and therefore be embraced. Reminds me of I always talk about this in group. It's something my therapist told me about the Buddha. You know, when the Buddha was trying to attain enlightenment and was being hit with all sorts of pain and suffering, the Buddha's approach was to invite all those things in for tea. So anytime I feel like personally in my own self, if I'm feeling some sort of upset or in a relationship, it's paradoxical, but like leaning into it, asking myself and my partner, hey, can we be with this? And then inviting whatever the negative emotion is in for tea and sitting with it and getting curious and being like, hey, okay, what is this about?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to pull back to the theme of like, this is, you know, February, around the time of Valentine's Day. And sometimes the pressure of these kinds of holidays, you know, either mean too much or mean too little in a relationship. So I wonder, like, if you were going to take that for tea, like, how would you think about, you know, when you were getting divorced or your marriage wasn't working out, how did this holiday affect you? And how is it affecting you now? If you were going to take the holiday, the theme of love and like hope and how you've changed and grown, you're going to
Yeah,
take that.
that's such an interesting question. I definitely remember being pissed at the idea of Valentine's Day when, especially when I was just out of my marriage. Like I hated it. It felt like a Hallmark holiday. We just need to. We're being forced by the card companies, the chocolate companies, the candy companies, whatever it might be, to celebrate something. And I don't feel that's that's like I do not feel that way. It's sort of a jaded perspective I once had. Now I feel like every day is Valentine's Day. And sure, on the actual day itself, great, like a wonderful excuse to go on a date with your loved ones or someone who you value and want to show your appreciation for in life. But it's less, I don't feel like I have there's as much pressure anymore. It is one of many days to express the good. And it's something I look forward to. And it's a fun celebratory moment as opposed to something to be avoided or looking at with like disdain.
Yeah, it's interesting because maybe in the days of the divorce or when the relationship, the marriage wasn't working out well, you were thinking about like this only symbolizes that I'm not making it. Like I'm like comparing myself to all the things in life that I'm failing, kind of thing. And now what you're saying is, well, now it's like you're much easier on yourself around it. And also you're feeling like you're much more open to love in general, or to feeling good about things in general, that it's easier for you to be like, yeah, it's just another excuse to do something nice for somebody, or to have a special moment, or to show somebody that I care about them. But it's not something that is marking like I'm not doing okay in that department.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I wonder if that's something to, for the people who are listening to this, if they're listening on this day or in this month, is like that maybe it's more of whatever you put on an occasion is what it is for you, and there might be some work to do if it's something that's aggravating you. It might be something like, yeah, this is just not one of those years that I'm going to be that into looking at other couples, but maybe there's going to be other years or other times where you're like, yeah, all the more power to people who are showing their love or wanting to celebrate something like a Hallmark holiday, you know?
For sure, for sure. I think in the past I would project whatever insecurities I was feeling around my relationships or that or lack thereof onto a holiday like Valentine's Day. And it was only after going through divorce and then doing so much group therapy with you and on my own time doing that work that I felt like I could fill my own cup and be comfortable enough in my own skin. And once I was able to give myself what I needed and what I felt like was missing, I no longer looked at a holiday like Valentine's Day in such a negative light. It was like it's a cherry on top. It's an added bonus. I'm
Yeah.
I'm giving myself what I need. I know how to speak up and in my relationship, show up in the right way and give myself and my partner what we both need. And then whatever happens on a day like that is like a nice to have, not a must have. I don't feel like I'm missing out if I don't celebrate. And if I do, then it's great. It's just that one more fun arrow in the quiver, feather in the cap.
Yeah, it's like a perspective switch. If you're really taking care of yourself and really tuned into yourself, then everything else is a bonus, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
Everything else is a bonus. And that took a lot of time. But once you get there, it just feels great.
So if you were gonna say, like, do an analysis for us about what were the most helpful resources that you discovered during this time of growth, from your, marriage that wasn't working to getting through your divorce to getting dating to getting into new relationships and feeling better about yourself, what were the main things that stick out in your head as like, that was a must do, that was a game changer?
There's so many levels to this. I think the first thing is self-care, good sleep, good nutrition, good exercise, meditation, self-compassion, exercises and gratitude, saying no, those sorts of things are like the baseline. But in order to get that stuff there, I feel like another level up from that is doing the work. So I do group therapy with you. I have an individual therapist, and I think showing up to therapy and having things to talk about and work on and improve is super critical. There's another layer which I would add books, reading Attached, reading the five love languages. I'm big into the Gottmans and everything they talk about, differentiation, individuation, those sorts of things. Good music. There's so many seminal albums. I'm thinking of like Fleetwood Mac, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, modern stuff, Beyonce, Miguel, you name it. There are tons of people before us who have gone through tough times. And I think in relationship and out, it was helpful to me to, in some way, shape, or form, dip my toes into like each and every single one of those.
Yeah, like almost the things that are the mood changers too, right? The uplifting kind of things that you do for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's to me the best way to feel good is just to take care of my body, mental and physical. So exercise and all that would feel great. Not burying this stuff. Like the importance of being in treatment is just that dealing with the mind and our feelings and all these different emotions that might arise. If there's not like an outlet for that, where else does it have to go except inwards? And I find that to be like a poison if you just stew on the past or what didn't work in relationships. And so therapy is like such a fantastic resource. All the groups you were talking about, like I found you on Meetup and I did your divorce support group and I've been in it for 5 years. And where I'm at now is very different from where I was when I started, but I continually find things to show up and work on. And that feels great because then I'm not carrying that baggage with me into my personal relationships or my work relationships or my family and friendships, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think one of the things to note too is that in the 5 years, it's been like the way that you've done group and the way that group has shifted, especially the group that you're in. Like people have really shifted in there, so it's almost like this advanced, like recreating your life group. And now I think people are just working on their life. So it went from the idea of people coming in to work on their divorce to really it takes a lot to have a life that feels fulfilling and satisfying, like, and you have to work at it, and not because life happens to everybody in all different ways. And so I think in the group we often see like people are working through things, like they didn't think that was going to happen, they didn't think they were going to get divorced, they didn't think that their relationship that they were in for the last 2 years wasn't going to work, like if they had left their marriage into another relationship. But it's almost like the endurance that people have to keep trying to make their life what they want it to be is really inspiring. And I think maybe that's what you've found in the groups that has kept you there so long.
Absolutely. Um,
And I'm not saying so long in terms of like you've been there too long. I'm saying that, if you're going to have a space that you can work on your life with other people who are really valuing their life and the quality of their relationships is pretty key. And to have whatever space you have to do that, like it doesn't necessarily mean to be in a recreating your life group, but it could be wherever you do that, like wherever you feel like you get feedback, wherever you get insight, if you're with other people who are growing too. I think all of that is the richness of like who we connect with in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, there's no stigma for me on therapy anymore. I think the world would be a better place if everybody was in some sort of group or individual therapy. But you're right, there's a million ways to get that sort of help in it. Some people it's like connecting with nature, other people, it's talking with friends or family. I 100% agree. The way I would show up to group at the beginning is different now. Like I'm not talking about the same stuff. At first, it's sharing the trauma and what went wrong and what the difficulties were, and then the next step is like figuring out what your part was in it. And then once I figured out what those things were, it's like I look at group or therapy or any of that stuff as practice, because relationships, human beings are everywhere, and the same things that I found difficult when I was married can be just as difficult in other facets of life. I'm thinking about how to handle rejection, for example, and coming to terms with, okay, I'm not for everybody, and I'm a lot better at that now. I realize that someone not wanting to be with me or not wanting to hire me or date me or whatever it might be doesn't actually have to have anything to do with who I am. And I didn't know that at the beginning of group, and now I do. I'm a lot better and more well equipped at handling hard conversations. Like I said earlier, I don't people please. I'm more in touch with some of my everyone has childhood of origin issues, but some of my own childhood attachment wounds, and I'm aware of that stuff. And all of those things help me to today, even 5 years on, avoid falling into the same life traps that I might have perpetually fallen into 5 or 6 years ago when I wasn't aware and doing all this.
Right. I wonder also, just to kind of summarize some of the things that we've been talking about. The last part I think that you've been talking about, which is really important, is the whole idea about practicing these life skills over and over again, like going towards the idea about like reframing and learning from some kind of situation instead of feeling like it stops you. That constant, where you're going to get your insight, where you're going to get your practicing to handle different situations so that you feel like you're in I don't know, in unison with what's around you, like you're choosing it. I'm not saying controlling it. You're choosing it. You're like, okay, I can handle this because I have these skills, or I'm going to be reminded of these skills, or I have this coping mechanism, or I have this way of taking care of myself over here. So maybe that's also the whole concept of like, being in love and being hopeful about love is that constant, I don't know, what would be the word? reservoir of being able to replenish yourself too, and
Yeah,
communicate with other people what you want more of.
100%. It's very, I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of exercise. I'm thinking of meditation. It's like you don't get great at. I'm not like good at meditating. I am not enlightened, and there's a lot of work to do. But I also know that sitting and meditating once isn't going to necessarily get me there. Same thing for getting in shape, eating one healthy meal, or working out once, lifting weights once isn't going to make me all of a sudden ripped or super healthy and all of that stuff. Just the same in relationships. It's constant learning, it's building slowly muscles and habits over time. And that's what I feel like I've been able to do. So 100% the theme is like is one of growth and slowly learning not to make the same mistakes, and then also learning what works, what gives me hope, what makes me happy, what is it that I want in relationships and out of life, and then going after actively pursuing those things.
Mhm. So what has it been like to have this conversation with me today? I know we've had lots of conversations over the years, like really deep conversations that we've discovered a lot of things. What would you say this today's conversation was about for you? Like what was some of the highlights? Maybe name three.
Sure. I mean, hard to know where to begin, but um, I think a big one is learning from the past and practicing new skills so that we're not doomed to repeat past mistakes. I think another one is about showing up fully, unabashedly, and fearlessly, not being afraid to to show the dark, to feel bad, to experience or share negative emotions with other people. And then the flip side, the reciprocal of that, of course, is not feeling like responsibility taking responsibility on for other people's upset or emotions. That's a big one. And then the other one is just that, like, that leveling up. Feels like every time you put into practice one of those learnings, things get better and relationships deepen in a way that feels fantastic, and wasn't necessarily possible if you hadn't put in the work ahead of time.
Mhm. So I'm gonna call that as like the theme for this conversation with you about the whole idea about loving, having the hope in yourself to love again, to love deeply, is the whole idea about learning from the past. And the past could even be like that conversation you had with your partner or your intimate partner this morning, right? Like learning
Yeah.
from the past, like, okay, I want to show up differently in that connection today. And the whole idea about showing up fully, like allowing yourself to really be with that person in the present, with yourself, in all your strengths and weaknesses, and talking about them and being there with them. And then the whole idea about leveling up, that intention that things will get better if you're working on them, that the relationships can get deeper, that you do have the capacity to grow and change. I think that's a really great way to end our talk around hope and love.
I love it. Well said, as always.
Yeah, and it's just good to just bat a few ideas around with you. And it's always nice to have someone who has been doing the work with me and seeing the way that I work and really growing. It's a really nice way to just see that this process of being in connection with other people and healing really works.
It does, because relationships are everywhere. We're constantly in relationship, and human beings are wonderful, complex creatures. And if we don't talk about this stuff, it's really hard to learn from it, or to make things improve.
Right. And I always go with my motto is like, for me, relationships are everything. They're like the most important thing.
I
So
love that. And they're two-way streets, but we can only be responsible for our half of things.
that's true. It's true. Well, thank you for taking the time in your day to talk with me.
You kidding, Susan? My pleasure, my privilege. Thanks for chatting with me. Always a treat to be able to talk with you, and I've benefited so much from your knowledge and your expertise over the years. So I'm very grateful that you exist.
Well, thanks for that. And wishing you lots of love and light. And I'll see you soon.
Sounds great. See you next week.
Okay. All right. Take
Bye.
care.